Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm here to review the Jewish content of these two books. The Light of the Midnight Stars by Rina Rosner and The Wolf and the Woodsman by Eva Reid. Each SFF September, I like to highlight Jewish books with speculative content. These two books are very similar in a lot of ways. Both came out earlier this year in 2021. And both are inspired in part by the Jewish experience of 13th to 14th century Hungary. Almost feels like they embarked on the same writing exercise, except I don't think these authors, know each other personally at all. Anywho, in other ways, these books are different, even opposed. I'll start with essays that each of these authors published to the Jewish Book Council, one in favor of fairy tales and one against them. Here is Rina Rosner, where she talks about her various inspirations. The Solomoners are also a myth from this era, red-haired wizards who rode cloud dragons in the skies. They were a kind of anti-Semitic trope, mountain men and women descended from the Khazars, or Red Jews, and were said to control the weather. I wanted to turn this on its head and reclaim it as part of my story and a part of a larger Jewish narrative. Ultimately, The Light of the Midnight Stars is a story about finding faith in the darkness. It is specifically about the time of the Black Plague of Europe, which many communities of Jews were blamed for and so expelled. And here is Eva Reid dissecting the nature of European fairy tales. The very effort to create a canon of European folklore, where the Jews are caricatured as the malevolent other, means that all European fairy tales are infected by proximity, with this poisonous bigotry seeping through even the most innocent of fables. How can one read Hansel and Gretel, ignorant of the knowledge that, beginning in the High Middle Ages, Jews were accused of kidnapping and eating Christian children? How can one read all of the tales that feature alluring but sinister wells without knowing that Jews were accused of well poisoning during the Black Plague and were persecuted because of it? This is the world that gave shape to these fairy tales, and so anti-Semitism seethes silently at their core, like a poison inside a witch's apple. So Rosner and Reid both start with the same historical template. European fairy tales and folk tales often meant to violently other Jews. The authors differ in how they twist to this template. Rosner decides to Jewish bend fairy tales, telling the narrative from the perspective of the oppressed, perhaps similar to what Madeline Miller did with her Greek myth retelling Circe. Reid decides that if European folktales by and large demonize Jews and other undesirables, she's going to pull the rug out from under them. She's going to expose folktales for what they often are, which is nationalist building blocks meant to force hegemony on diverse society. The Jews in both books are facing a bleak reality. But despite the fact that The Wolf and the Woodsman is more of a grim-dark fantasy, or certainly more gory, it is The Light of the Midnight Stars where Jews have it worse. The Solomoners are expelled from Hungary after a Hungarian noble converts in order to marry a Jewish girl, which is based off of a real-life tale, actually. Anywho, the main family ends up in Wallachia, a country that is supposed to have freedom of religion, but the reality is much messier. The three sisters of the family each end up losing their faith, or at least their full-throated Jewish practice, in order to survive. Here they are when they first arrived in Wallachia, where they bury mementos from their past. This section is being narrated by the character Stana, or Sarah as she was known in her Jewish Hungarian village. She bends down and starts digging by the roots of the large tree. When she's finished, she gets up and dusts off her hands. She places the silver candlesticks that Jacob gave her on their wedding night in the hole, and then covers it with loose earth. "I will plant strawberry seeds," she says, sprinkling them on top of the silver, together with Jacob's candlesticks. "Perhaps they will grow here, and we can come harvest them. And when we eat them, I will remember him." Her eyes are shining and wet. "I'm in shock because I brought Guvriel's talit out here with me, planning on finding a place to hide it, but I hadn't said a word about it. I start to think maybe my sisters are closer to me than I ever thought before. That maybe I was always looking to pick a fight and find the things that separated us, while staying blind to all of the things that bound us together." "Anna," I say, you don't have to. It's better this way. A fresh start. Papa has forbidden us to light candles in windows anymore. I look down at my feet and take out the package I brought. Anna nods, almost as though she has anticipated this. I place the tallit I was making for Guvriel in a hole beside the one she dug. Anna puts a hand on my shoulder. You don't have to. I think this is where it belongs. I brought it with me today to find a place for it here. It felt like the right thing to do. I look up at her. Papa says we will no longer have to cower like a sheep here. We have left those parts of ourselves far behind. My tears wet the white wool as I whisper a prayer. Protect me, God, for I put my faith in thee, and cover it with loose earth. I look to Letitia. Her face looks white as milk in the moonlight, her soft copper hair falling around her face. She bends down and takes the Book of Solomoners out of her pocket. Anna gasps. Does Papa know you have it? She asks. No, Mama stuffed it into my bag before we fled, but maybe it's better this way. I don't think Papa would want it out of the house if he knew, I say. Go ahead, Anna says. Letitia digs a shallow rectangular hole that looks like a small grave, then gently rests the book inside. I think I see 3 tears drop onto the book. They look like little glinting stars, but I can't be sure. It's getting darker and darker. She covers the hole she made with earth, kisses her fingers, then presses her palm down on the earth, the way we used to kiss every holy book we opened or closed. Anna waves her hands 3 times over the little mounds of earth, the same way Mama always used to before she lit candles. With this, we leave our past behind us. Dust to dust, ashes to ashes, may the earth consume the past. May these items strengthen the roots of this tree as we put down roots in this new land. Amen, I say. Amen, Letitia echoes. The Jews, or Yehuli as they are named in The Wolf and the Woodsman, live in the capital city of the Hungary-based country, where they are forced to live only on one street and do the sort of sinful jobs that the members of the Patrafaith, aka Christians, don't want to do themselves. The Yehuli are scapegoats, blamed for society's ills, and paraded out for public humiliation and punishment, which was often true to real medieval times. The main character, Avike, learns that neighboring Patrafaith countries are sending their Yehuli to the stake, which seems fashioned after the Russian Empire's Pale of Settlement. Avike's father explains the politics to her, including his and other Yehuli's desire to stay in their current home. During the council meeting, I start, my voice low and uncertain. There was this one count, the Count of Akosvar, who said that there was a place for Yehuli where they can have towns and villages of their own, a strip of land in Rodinia that has been set aside for them. He said the other countries in the West are already sending their Yehuli there. The lambent humor drains from Zygmunt's eyes. They call it the stake. It is cobbled from the worst bits of land in the Rhodinian Empire, scraggly and cold, where not much good can grow. The Yehuli there live in their own towns and villages, it's true, but there are laws forbidding them from owning land and selling wares, from working on certain days, from sending their children to school. And then patricians come from the nearby cities to burn the Yehulik houses, to kill. They don't even spare the women and children. A lump rises hard and hot in my throat. But doesn't all of that happen here? Nandor had you arrested and tortured for working on a patrician holy day, and now he threatens to visit violence upon the Yehuli. My family, Zygmunt starts, and then clears his throat, amending himself. Our family has lived in Kurali Sek for 6 generations. We have served kings and counts. We have done everything from goldsmithing to street sweeping. We watched the city gates fall to King Isfan's enemies, and then be built back up again. We saw his coronation, and murmured about it in an old Magyar with the rest of them. This is our home, as much as Kezi is yours. Again, the authors are taking different tacks. Rosner's Jews are dealing with the reality that forced them from their homes, whether they wanted it or not. Reid's Yehuli have not been forced out yet, and are adamant that they want to stay in a place where they've laid down roots. I also want to talk about how magic manifests in both of these books, since, hey, it is the fantasy genre. The Light of the Midnight Stars, as mentioned above, takes some of its magic from an anti-Semitic fairy tale. The Solomoners, descended from King Solomon, rode cloud dragons and were otherwise in touch with nature. Shape-shifting, healing, manipulating the elements, convening with stars. It's all very vaguely described. There's no real magical rule book, other than constant practice, often alongside Talmudic study or prayer recitation. Magic in Reid's world has more rules. Pagans and members of the Patrifaith either mutilate themselves or subject themselves to hard conditions, for the sake of the promise of power. Yehuli use words, tracing Hebrew to make things happen, kind of more like a parlor trick. I suppose it's not too surprising in a book that is more critical of fantastical elements, and ergo has a less romantic magical system. The same is true for folk tales in the books as well. Reid's folk tales feel more academic. The pagans and the Patrifaith are learning how to please or displease their gods. The Yehuli, on the other hand, are learning how to stand up for themselves. Reid invokes two real Jewish tales. That of Queen Esther, who saves her people from a despotic Persian vizier, and that of the golem, which is a magical creature created by a rabbi to protect his people from anti-Jewish attacks. Rosner's folk tales are far more personal. I mean, that's kind of her intent, I suppose, to take real-life fairy tales and apply them to her characters. The characters tell these folk tales throughout the novel, about love and loss and a personal search for meaning. They are filled with magical conceits, but underneath all of that, especially as the narrative goes on, their true purpose is laid bare. These folk tales are meant to comfort the persecuted in a dangerous alien world. When it comes to a more authentic portrayal of Judaism, I think Rosner takes the cake. And not just because she's writing about the more or less real world. It's because her book is infused with Torah and Talmud study, with a rabbi convening his disciples to learn, with his daughters infusing their lives in prayer and parable and halacha, that is, Jewish law, until tragically they have to pick and choose a few aspects and abandon the rest to survive. Reid's story is told by an outsider. Although Avike is half Yehuli, she didn't grow up in the community. Kezi, which I referenced in my quote, is a pagan community. And what she gleans about Yehuli life in the novel is slight. Pretty much just enough to fit into Reid's themes of xenophobia and nationalism. A couple of stories centered around Yehuli attempts to best their oppressors is just a tiny sliver of the richness of Jewish life. That being said, taking the broader view of both novels into account, I gave a higher rating to The Wolf and the Woodsman than I did to The Light of the Midnight Stars. Yes, the Yehuli/Jewish stuff was slight, but Reid nailed a lot of her other themes, and with compelling world building to boot. Rosner, by contrast, bit off a little more than she could chew. And alas, all of the inspirational folk tales and etc. that she listed in her considerable author's note made for impressive research, but not a cohesive story. But anyway, you can find the links to my Goodreads reviews for both of these books listed down below, as well as the two authors' essays on the Jewish Book Council website. And that's all I have for you right now. I think it's going to take some considerable editing to get this up and going, but I'm very proud of this video, and thank you for sticking with my scripted self. And I should be back, hopefully, in the next few days to do a Friday Reads video, or something close to a Friday Reads video when I have more to report on what I am reading currently. So stay tuned. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.